All right. All right. I think we're good. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Perek Sheni, Halacha Daled, and Halacha Hey. We are learning today Daf Yud Zayin. We're starting Mamish on top of the Amid. Before we go on, I want to make a very important correction yesterday. Actually, there's a line in the Gemara that we learned on Daf Tez Zayin, Amid Beis, that has to be relearned. There isn't time to do that, and it's not that difficult, but here's the correction. That's the ikk. That when you have two people that are neighboring one the other, Reuven and Shimon, Reuven owns a sada, Shimon owns a sada. They don't have an obligation to make any space between their fields. Wow. Why? Because in the Isser of Kalayim, again, going back to the Pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, Satcha loisizra kaloyim, your fields. The very fact that the field belongs one to the Reuven and one to Shimon, that in itself already creates a distinctness, a separation. And as we will continuously learn, that particularly when it comes to Kilei Zerayim, the issue is not that one is going to derive nourishment from the other. The issue is not that one of Yanika. The issue is, you can use the words marasayim, but the issue is that it looks like there is a mingling. The very fact that two people own each one their own field, and people know that. So you know it's not mingled. This is Reuven's, that's Shimon's. Okay, I'm saying that. I know there's a line that has to be relearned. The truth is that we're going to relearn it today. So let's go like this. First of all, before halacha hey, let's quickly go back. The Mishnah said that when you have a meishar, not a field, a strip. Now, guys, I just want to quickly repeat. Whoever missed yesterday's introduction should go back. There's going to be 3 dinim. Sada, which has the minimum size that we spoke about yesterday. If it's less than a sada, there is a difference between a land, a patch that's called meruba, that's a square. We're going to see this, versus a meishar. A meishar is a rectangular. That means it's narrow. There is a minimum size of the narrowness. We mentioned 6 tfachim, and it's long. So the din that we learned yesterday is that when you have a meishar, even if originally a person had a field, and they planted everything consistently in that field, but then they turned their field into strips of a meishar. So the din is that they are allowed to plant in each meishar a different plant, whether we're talking about grains, whether we're talking about legumes. I want to add something that I didn't say yesterday, that dafka grains and legumes is what we are talking about. Chevra halkab, vegetables could be different. I just want to say why. Because by vegetables, their leaves that go above the ground could become long, right? Can become big, can become large. And even when you leave the shiurim that we learned yesterday, we don't want for the leaves to mingle. Again, it's a marasayim. We don't want for there to be the appearance of a taroivis, which is the translation of the word kalayim. So I'm just putting it out there. So let's stay focused on grains and legumes and beans, stuff like that. Okay? And we learned you have to have 2 amas with, even though the Mishnah never said 2 amas. The Mishnah had a machlokes, Beishamai and Beisilol, but we, the Gemara, interpreted to be 2 amas. And then we're going to only go back to the shita of Rabbi Chia Ruba, even though we're going to have today yet a 3rd opinion. Yesterday we learned Rabbi Chia Ruba and Rabbi, but the focus will be that Rabbi Chia, the great Rabbi Chia, said that the gap of 2 amas doesn't have to be throughout the entirety of both strips, but they do have to have the length of 2 amas. So it's like a box. So it's 2 amas width, which is what the Mishnah spoke about. It has to only go, but it has to go for 2 amas length. And then it can narrow down. I use the word taper. It can narrow down. And then at the end, all you need is a mashahu of space. The Gemara is going to begin today with a simple question. When you have the rectangular, but the rectangular kevan is not that long. For sure, the question is, what happens if it's less than 2 amas? But I'll tell you more. Even if it's more than 2 amas, let's say it's only 3 amas. Would we always have the same shiur, the great Rabbi Chia, 2 amas wide, and there has to be 2 amas length? Or do we say that when do you have to have 2 amas length prior to it narrowing down? Is if it's very, very long. But at some point, we're going to say that we apply the idea of Rabbi Chia Ruba proportionally, and when the strips are shorter or very short, it doesn't even have to be 2 amas long, which will be the conclusion in the Gemara, as we'll see. That will be the shtickle before halacha hey. Now, halacha hey, I know we quoted it a few times already. Halacha hey, the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin is going to introduce the din, what we're going to refer to as Roish Toir. I know there is a big debate as to what these words mean. We're going to go with the many that say the word Toir, Taf, Vav, Reish, comes from a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. There, it's in reference to a triangular article of jewelry. And I know, Kevin, we're going to, that's not the ideal picture, but it doesn't matter. There's another picture that we'll get to when we get to the Mishnah. What we're going to see, and what's the din of a Roish Toir? Yesterday, we learned that when you have to make a separation between Meishar and Meishar, even according to the leniency of Rabbi Chia Ruba, there always has to be some space. However, by a Roish Toir, let me use these words. If you have a plantation that's shaped like a diamond and adjacent to it, belonging to the same person, you have a patch of land that's shaped like a box, like a square, and the diamond is going into the square, so the relatively pointy side is going into the straight side. So any observer sees these are 2 separate plantations. Not only are they, don't you have to make a distance? That's a great picture. Not only do you not have to make a distance, more than that, you can mamish touch. And according to some Rishonim, not only touch, we allow one to protrude into the other. Now that nafkamina will play its way out throughout the entire sugya. I'm not going to go back and forth. People don't have time, and we're going to learn the ikrim because these are new things for us, which is ashreinu. So just you see, that's a great picture. According to the Rosh, as whoever's looking at the Zoom, he allows that this protrusion can actually enter into the other, which is gavaldik. Why? Same logic, because the observer sees that it's not the same patch. It's not called mixed. It's not mingled. It's a protrusion. It's not a taroivis. It's not a kalayim. Okay, but we're going to go that it doesn't have to even go in. What will happen throughout today's daf is that we will extend the application, the leniency of Roish Toir a lot. We will have a machlokes between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish regarding this Roish Toir. Let's call it dispensation. Rabbi Yechanan will be more machmer. Okay. One important, we're going to learn 2 chumras of Rabbi Yechanan, but let me emphasize in the words of introduction 1, that if you have the piece, right, of Roish Toir, that's different. It's like an extension. If it's unconnected to the planted field, so you have, before we had a picture, we had one to the right, one to the left. So the one to the right has at the end like a Roish Toir. What happens if that's not connected? So there's a plantation. Then there's another little strip. Halachically, we will view it as connected, as we'll learn when we learn the sugya. But it's not physically connected. Rabbi Yechanan holds that if it's not physically connected, if there's going to be any added small piece of plantations, we cannot apply the kula of Roish Toir. It has to be physically connected to one large patch that's coming in from another angle, or there's a protrusion, but the protrusion is connected. The extension, not the extension, has to be connected. Reish Lakish, it doesn't even have to be connected. Even the conclusion of today's daf, it's gavaldik, is that even l'chumras Rabbi Yechanan, that holds, like I mentioned, that the extension has to be connected. Even Rabbi Yechanan will be moided that it doesn't matter if the extension was planted at a later time. So you have on the right wheat, on the left you have barley. Even if this extended Roish Toir, as long with Rabbi Yechanan that it's physically connected to the wheat, so you have more wheat, but the wheat is coming in just a little strip. Now that it's physically connected, we will apply the leniency of Roish Toir, and therefore we will allow for the wheat either to touch the barley, or according to the Rosh and other Rishonim, even to protrude into the barley. Okay, Atkan, the words of introduction. And Chevra, let's go into Daf Yud Zayin all the way on top of the Amud. So again, we're going back L'shitas, what we call in the Yerushalmi Rabbi Chia Ruba, the great Rabbi Chia, known in the Bavli just as Rabbi Chia. And again, he was coming with a big leniency. It's funny how the Gemara is viewing it almost as a stringency. It's once we accept that the 2 amas width, that the Gemara translated into 2 amas. The Mishnah had again Machlokes Beishamai and Beisilol, and they're very close. We said the shear of Beishamai of 3 talamim to the Beisilol shear of the length, according to me, the Rashadilio learns the length of the oil that was used in the region of Sharon, which is around 2 amas. So the Mishnah spoke about the width. Rabbi Chia says, don't think the width has to go the whole in the whole separation of Meishar Aleph to Meishar Beis. It only has to go 2 amas length, and then it can taper off, it can narrow down. So Rabbi Lazar Shal, what happens if these 2 Meishars, guys, that's what we're talking about. The 2 Meishars, the Meishar to the right and the Meishar to the left, are not that long. Now, what does it mean not that long? You'll see in a moment. From the Gemara's conclusion, you'll understand what the Gemara is asking. But I'll give you the simplest way. What happens if the whole thing is less than 2 amas? What are the 2 options? Option number 1 is, so what? The separation of 2 amas width has to be for 2 amas length. So then it's going to have to be the whole thing. Or do we say that the concept of the great Rabbi Chia could also be applied over here? Exactly what will be the share, we'll see soon, but we're going to proportionally do the same idea. We're going to, of course, there has to be one area where the width is that of Beishamai or Beisilol of 2 amas, but it doesn't have to go throughout the whole between Meishar 1 and Meishar 2. We will even here allow it to get narrowed down, for it to taper off, but that's going to mean it's not going to go for 2 amas length. So that's the question. Which options do we say, and how would we apply it? So now the Gemara is going to get to an answer. Neshmeina min hadan, recording a Braisa, and actually here in the Braisa, we're going to be learning a shita that we did not learn yesterday. This is a third opinion. Let's read it inside. Says the Tana, says the Braisa, Rabbi Lazar bar Shimon, and we're going to go end Abba Yosi ben Yochanan. Which one? Ish Yonoyach. That's the name of a place. Amru, they are of opinion. Big Doilam. When we have a large field. Now, guys, let's remind ourselves, as we spoke about yesterday in our words of introduction, that our entire Mishnah, Halacha, Dalid, is only speaking about Meishar LeMeishar. We're going to have an explicit Mishnah later that if it's Ben Sadeh, L'Sadeh, the gap that has to separate 2 fields that belongs to the same person, in each one there's a different item being planted, has to be a Beis Roiva. Okay? Now says the Braisa that when a person has a large field, how wide must the gap be? Now this is going to be quite amazing. So first of all, the larger land cannot be, not a larger piece of land. We'll see in a moment how big is it. It must be a little bit less than the Sada. By a Sada, you have to have a Beis Roiva. Here, we're speaking about a large field, but not large enough for it to trigger the din of a Beis Roiva. But in other words, we're still back to the shear of the Meishar, which is 2 amas. But how long does the 2 amas width gap have to be? Says the Braisa, 50 amos. Wow. Now, I just want to say like this, that 50 amas is the size of a Beis Sa'ah. Guys, don't be nervous if you're not going to remember this now, but God willing, Be'ezras Hashem, as the more we get into these Masechtas, the more people are just going to naturally remember these Shiurim. Okay, so let's go like this. When you have 50 amas is a shir of a Beis Sa'ah. This opinion holds that the gap of 2 amas has to go for 50 amas. Wowee. But this Tana also holds with the idea that we heard from Rabbi Chia Ruba, it doesn't have to go the whole thing. It doesn't have to go the whole thing. After 50, it's correct. After 50 amas, not 2 amas, 50 amas, it can narrow down, like Rabbi Yeruba says. But here continues the Tana, these two Tanoim, Ubiktana, Al Pirubam. Now, guys, 50 amas long is if the fields go for around 100 amas. So 50 amas would be half, or will be half. What happens if 50 amas of length will be more than the majority? It will be the roiv of the separation between the two fields. Ad kedei kach, we don't want that to be. So ubiktana, if the fields are 1 inch less than 100 amas, what happens then? If that happens, then the 50 amas covers roiv. So all we need to do is al piruba. All you need to have is the roiv. So let's go further. What happens if the gap between the two fields, guys, let's say the length, this field is 70 amas and this field is 70 amas, right? What's half of 70 amas? 35 amas. So then you only have to have the 2 amas width for 36 amas. In other words, these Tanoim are saying that number one, the ikir, you don't have to have the 2 amas width the whole thing. But they are also saying we never needed to be more than roiv. Rabbi Yeruba is not saying that, guys. Rabbi Yeruba says it only has to go 2 amas wide. But let's apply this concept in our kasha. What was our kasha? That if the strips are they're not long, they're very short. Let's say the strips are 3 amas long. That's it. What's roiv of 3 amas? 1.6, right? 1.5 is half. 1.6. So the Gemara is saying 1.6 amas length will also be enough. And then it can narrow down. In other words, once you have roiv of the length between Meishar Aleph and Meishar Beis with the separation of 2 amas, you do allow it then to narrow down. Rabbi says 2 amas, yeah, because normally 2 amas won't even be roiv. When you have very long fields, it's going to be much less than that. But Rabbi Yeruba, we already said yesterday, is leaning on other Tanoim that argue with Rabbi. So don't forget, Rabbi Yeruba is not making it up. So on one hand, the 2 amas is very lenient, but he goes even more lenient. That if it's very short, you never need more than roiv. Gavaldik. So says the Gemara, Ma im elu shenasnu shir legedolim. If these 2 Tanoim, Rabbi Lazar ben Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yosef ben Yochanan Ishanayim, if they hold that the 2 amas width has to go for 50 amas, that means they're very machmir. Even they are moidel loy nasnu shir lektana. They didn't give a share of 50 amas, but you know what they gave? They gave a simple rule: the gap never has to be more than roiv of the length between one and the other. That idea we're going to apply to Rabbi Yeruba. So Chachamim, Rabbi Yeruba is based on the Chachamim of yesterday's Braisa that goes against Rebbe. What does that mean? He says you never need more than 2 amas. You don't even need roiv. You don't even need, in most cases, 2 amas will be on nothing. But for sure, roiv will be enough. Is like kolchein shlenit nushir lektana, which is beautiful. So again, if the strip, let's say, is 3 amas long, 6 tefachim wide, and the Mishnah says you have to have a gap of 2 amas width. How long does the 2 amas width have to go? 1.6. It's really 1.5, 1. Once you get to roiv, then it can narrow down. That clarifies the Gemara's kasha, and now we're moving into the new sugya halacha hey of Rosh Hashanah. Says the Holy Mishnah.
The word Torah is a triangle?
There are different, many people say Torah means an ox. There are different interpretations. We're going to just go with one. I think it's of the Bar Tanuram, and these are the classic. Yes, David, that Torah, the Lashon HaPasik, is a triangular piece of jewelry. And I will see what will become clearer is that it doesn't have to be a triangle. Let me use the word extension. That will be, I think, the best word that's coming to mind as we'll unpackage the Gemara. So in other words, if you have 2 boxes or 2 strips, but they're parallel each other and they're mesuded, there's no Rosh Torah. That's where we say they can't mamish touch each other. 2 amas width, it can narrow down to some separation. The moment Yeah, when you look at a plantation, the easiest way of imagining a Rosh Tar is a diamond and a square. And it doesn't have to be mamish right angle. It can be, it doesn't have to be like this. It can be like this. It can be like that. Whoever's seeing what I'm doing over here. What the Gemara is going to say, we'll see, it doesn't even have to be that. If you have strips of it, and out of this strip, you have a little extension. That's called a Rosh Tar. And which would mean, look at that this extension can minimally touch, and according to some Rishonim, even protrude. I'm going to stick with the touching because I don't want to go back and forth. Even though whether touch is the max or even go into will affect some of these Gemaras how to learn it. I know I'm very happy that there are some pictures that Kevin is bringing down over here, but I would like to stick, if you can show the top right picture, that will be the way we're going to learn the sugya, and we're going to be consistent. Okay, says the Holy Mishnah. That's a great picture. Whoever can see the zoom, so the field on the right is a wheat field. The field on the left in the picture is a barley field. I know he made it perfect, like it's a diamond into the side, right? The angle into the straight. That's the simplest interpretation of Rosh Tar. So says the Holy Mishnah, Hoya Rosh Tar Chitin. If a piece of land that has in it wheat planted is in the configuration of what we were calling a Rosh Tar, which means it's angled differently than the field to the left in which you have barley. Now listen to the literal words of the Mishnah. The nichnas b'toich shal sa'orim. Wow. Again, the Rosh learns the nichnas. The nichnas is not like Kavan has in the picture. The nichnas would mean that a mamish goes into, or the nichnas means it touches. Because touching, mamish touching. Says the Mishnah Mutter, reminding everyone that vegetables might be different. People should understand that. And the issue with vegetables, if we don't go with the rush, that means if we don't allow for protrusions to happen, there are certain plants whose leaves are long and they extend themselves. If you allow them to touch, they're going to end up protruding. You get that? That will be a problem. But let's focus on grains and legumes where you don't have that issue. People know a grain field. The grain field is a stalk. It goes up straight. It doesn't extend. Now, why is it allowed? You're touching. No, the problem is not touching. The problem is mingling. In other words, it's discernible that these species are not co-mingled. Next, the end of the Mishnah, as the if you have two fields, David. Again, this is the correction that we're making based on what we said yesterday, that if there are two neighbors, I hope Ido's here. I know he was here before because I needed to make this correction, especially for him. He asked the question, me and you, neighbor, none of us are bound to move our plantations back. Unlike by Kili Hakerem is different. None of this applies to a vineyard. But by Zerayim, look inside the Pnei Moshe, the first one under the Gemara. Means the top medium-sized line in the Pnei Moshe. You don't even need the Rosh Tar leniency. You don't need for them to be configured, in different directions. No. And that's based on the pasuk in Kedoshim Satcha, your property. Ulefikach muter gamkein lismoich loy etzel soldeu shal chite me oisa hamin shal sedei chaveroi lefisha zanira kisoik sadu shal chaveroi ve'en anira kalayim. Now, 1 second. Shaloi chite me shal chaveroi min acher. What is he talking about? I'll tell you what he's talking about. He's saying like this.
What?
The Mishnah, the first line. Shaloi chite me shal chaveroi min acher. Not a problem. That's not like a given because it belongs to two different people. No. People know, even though they touch. They're not protruding. They're touching. Doesn't look like a mixture. Why they? Nothing, because people know this belongs to Abraham. This belongs to God. 1 second. Now comes the chiddush. Here's the chiddush. The next line. That's what the Pnei Moshe was referring to. So David Halkop, listen to this. Me and you, right? David has wheat. Let's just say I have barley. No problem. What happens if at the edge of my field, that's neighboring you, David, I also want to put wheat. Now, what's going to happen? Don't forget, I'm not mingling them. I'm making one row or two rows of wheat. Since I'm allowed to plant my barley next to your wheat, if I'm going to, in my own field, put at the edge wheat, the observer won't realize that wheat belongs to me. Because since you planted wheat and I'm planting ma'oisa hamin like yours, you know what it looks like? They're going to think your field is a little bit bigger. There's no fence.
So you need two
No,
tevachim?
there's no picture to that.
You need two tevachim?
No, you don't. Then you don't need anything. The whole two tfachim is not about Yanika. No. The whole two tfachim kevan is about marasayim. It has to look distinct. Then we're making a rule that when you have two neighbors, two different owners, you don't even have to make an appearance of distinct, because the people's awareness of distinct ownership is enough of a separation. I don't want to say the word piggyback, because why should we use a chazer? We can cow back on that I can plant. I want a little bit of wheat. Since I'm allowed to plant barley until yours, I can plant wheat. When I plant wheat near yours, people that look will think that this wheat is yours. And then I can plant the barley. That's mutter lismaich loy moisamin. Wow.
So it's only because they think the field is longer.
Because they're going to think that my wheat belongs to David. Again, guys, don't forget, we're not mixing the seeds. We're planting one furrow adjacent the other. The separation that's needed is to make a distinction. Ownership made the distinction. The chitim that I'm planting belongs to me. People don't know that. Marasayim. It's amazing. Amazing.
It's the same thing if he's leasing the land. If he's leasing, it's the same thing.
I don't know for sure, but I think so. I think that in many other areas of halacha, right, that when you lease for that period of time, you're the owner, right? Who's chayv to do b'dikas chametz? The guy, not the owner, the guy that's leasing. Now next, shaloi chitem v'shal chaveri chitem, and you have two neighbors. Really, we'll see that in the general din of the Mishnah, it's not about the neighbors, but there's a reason why the Mishnah writes it, of course. But let's go, David. You have chitim and I have chitim. Mutter lismach loy telam shol pishtem. I'm allowed to plant at the edge of my field, which will also be neighboring your field, one furrow of flax, only flax. Okay. And by the way, I'm only allowed to plant one furrow of flax at the edge of my field. I'm not allowed to plant it in the middle of my field. Why would I be allowed to plant one furrow of flax at the edge of my field? Now, the reason why the Mishnah says, David, that it me neighboring you and they both have chitim, because the flax will be in between wheat. Doesn't matter, because your field is separate. I'm allowed to plant. That means even if I don't have a neighbor, I'm allowed to plant. If I have a field of chitim, if what I'm planting is only one furrow of flax, I can plant it without kevan any separation. Unique to flax. V'loi talam shen minachen. And why is that? Says the Pnei Moshe. We'll see this in the Gemara. Pnei Moshe is 7 lines under the Gemara, or the third last line of the medium lines. People never plant one row of flax. So why is the guy planting it? So the haraya, it's all about what it looks like. The person that's looking, yoideya. Shalom Nischaben said that why did a guy plant the one furrow of flax? He wants to know whether this earth is good for planting flaxseed. Not now, for next year, for 20 years. And that's unique to flax, because flax, no one plants in one row. Now, again, there's 2 points to this. Number one, that is not going to give me a heter to plant in the middle of my field. That only allows me to plant it at the last furrow of my field. Why did the Mishnah mention shaloi chitim v'shal chaveru chitim? Because since I have wheat and you have wheat, even if I plant the pishtan at the edge of my field, it's in the middle of the wheat. That doesn't matter. It's not the middle of the wheat. The neighbor doesn't count. We're only looking at the same owner. The same owner has it at the edge. Now, Rab Shimon and Rabbi Yossi we will further explain when we get there in the Gemara. But let's read the words. Rab Shimon Omer, no, echad zara pishtan ve'echad kol aminim. No, he disagrees with it's not unique to flaxseed. It's any one furrow. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, even more. Not like the Tanakama that says that flax, one furrow, only a flax, but at the edge, this concept that since no one plants one row of flaxseed, so the Haroya knows that it's only a test to try out the soil. And that's allowed without any separation, is even in the middle. Again, guys, we're going to come back to Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yossi, and we understand the words. We read the words. We'll get more to that in the Gemara. But let's first focus on the general heter of the ratio of Halacha Hey, which is the heter of Rosh Hashanah. We quoted Shitas Reish Lakish already, but now we're going to see the ground zero of the following argument between Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yechanan is more machmer. He limits the heter of Rosh Hashanah. Reish Lakish will be more lenient in how he applies Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara. Reish Lakish b'shem Chizkiah holds that Rosh Hashanah haba mechurva mutar. Now that was the picture that Kevin put up at the wrong time. You can put up the picture at the right time. You guys, listen to this. We mentioned this yesterday. I own a land, and God forbid, and I wrongfully, halachically, illegally, I planted, let's say, the left with barley. No, not that picture, not that picture. And I planted the right with wheat. Okay?
We can't see which one is it.
I know. One second. Kevin is going to get it up. Now, where it says destroyed area. When I did that, guys, remember the halacha. Even though the Torah allows us post facto to have hana'ah from the product, I'm allowed to benefit from it. But you know what has to happen? I have to uproot it. Okay? When I would uproot it, David, I have to uproot whatever space I should have left. I have to uproot everything in that space. In the case where I did not uproot it, some locust came, some fire came, some wind blast came, and it destroyed the field of the right, not in its entirety. It destroyed a portion of it. That which remains now, that's the right picture, is now in the configuration of a Rosh Hashanah. If I lechatchila would have planted species 2 in that configuration, then I did nothing wrong. When I planted it, I planted the entire, what it says here, destroyed area. But then, Rosh Hashanah haba mechurva, then it became charuv, it became destroyed. So what are the two options then? Do we say that right now, when a person looks at it, it's apparent that it's distinct, because that's what the Mishnah is telling you, that if it's planted in a different angle, it can even touch. Maybe even protrude, but it can zicher touch. Rabbi Yechanan says, I don't care that now it's in the configuration of the Rosh Hashanah. Since when you planted it, there was an obligation for you to uproot it. That obligation did not fly out of the window. It's not okay. I'm sorry. We're learning Reish Lakish first. We're learning Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, I'm saying correct. I just said the wrong one first. Reish Lakish, Shem Chizkiah says, we look at the now. Big difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva. Rabbi Yechanan is a tzaddik. A tzaddik can even go back to the past. A tzaddik can go back to the past. A Baal Tshuva cannot go back to the past. The past, the person did something you're not allowed to do. The Baal Tshuva looks at the present. Where are you right now? You're good now. It's good. Because now, listen to my words. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, no. The whole it's a big leniency. You know when we say it? When it always was a Rosh Hashanah. You planted it lechatchila in the correct configuration. There was never a chiyuv for you to uproot anything. Even though now you have a Rosh Hashanah, now because it got destroyed. But you planted it b'oifen ha'asur. You already had an obligation to uproot it, says Rabbi Yechanan asur. Now we're going to have another machlokes, in which again we're going to see how Rabbi Yechanan is more machmer. Says the Gemara, guys, we're in the bottom of the Yud Zayin. This is Gavaldik. See, it's easy when you have the pictures, right? When you see it. If you don't see it, it's not a hard higoyon. Of course, the logic behind this, Torah is infinite, but just the mitzias, you have to get the mitzias. Chizkiah Amar, Mi sheish lebeis Yisrael v'chol shehu. All right, and the entire Beis Roiva is planted with one species. And guys, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, don't forget that Reish Lakish said the same Chizkiah. So Chizkiah is also the lenient one. So you have again, you have a Beis Roiva, and you have a piece of land next to it. I know he made no picture for it, but it's not one consistent piece of land, which can be a box, which can be a triangular, which can be a rectangular. It's a piece of land, and there is an extension. It's not masuded, all right? You know what I mean? Like look at a piece of paper. There's a piece of paper. Imagine if there'd be a little strip going out in any direction, even parallel to this, but it's not part of it. There is something extending from the land. Says Chizkiah, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, Oisai Kol Shuhu, in that extension, you know what you view that extension as? You view that extension as a Rosh Toir. You know what the Chiddush is? That extension is not coming from another field. There is no other field. It's not connected to something else. Actually, that extension is connected to the only patch that you have. You have a patch, let's say it's a box, and in any direction you have this epicenter extension. When a person looks at the configuration, we see this when you go on airplanes, it's not a Masudar Dika patch of land in any way you made it. Says Chizkiah, look at that extension as if it's coming from another field. Since it's not part of field number one, you're allowed to plant anything you want in it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, no. Why? Tell you what, Rabbi Yochanan holds that Rosh Toir that can touch, right? Let's say Aleph is wheat, Beis is the Rosh Toir barley. We allow the diamond point to touch Aleph because it's coming from a Beis. If there is nothing in Beis, it's only a little piece. Look, that little piece is part of Aleph, not part of a non-existent Beis. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan says Rosh Toir is only if it is coming from another field. Now, Amar Rab Zeira, now it's going to get fun. Amar Rab Zeira, Moide Rabbi Yochanan, even Rabbi Yochanan who's machmer will agree. She'im hoya Beis Roiva u'mechza, if your total area is a Beis Roiva u'mechza. Now, Kevin, put up the picture, please. And Shu Zereya Chatzi Roiva Mikan, v'Chatzi Roiva Mikan, oise Chatzi Roiva Nidon Lakan u'Lakan. Oh. Now, here we go. First of all, in the case that we are talking about, I just want to make it clear. If you look at the art scroll, right, he's making it a 7.2 amas in the length, and he's making it now, there are 3 shtiklach. If you divide it into 3 separated areas, each one is 7.2 amas. I want to say like this, guys, that this will be the first time that we'll realize that the leniency that we learned yesterday, which says that between strip and strip, what's the max space you need? 2 amas, and not even the whole thing. That's only if it's a strip. Strip means it's longer than by a meruba. The shear here in this example, the shear of 2 amas is not enough. Okay. Now, there are 2 statements that we're making. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? This is important. That if you have a strip of it, an extension is not chashuv for it to be considered a Rosh Toir. The extension has to come from a field. If it doesn't come from a field, you don't have a heter of Rosh Toir. Rabbi Yochanan will be moida that in the configuration, if you see the picture, you'll see what we're saying. Every side is considered chashuv. The 7.2 by 7.2 is not enough for it to be considered chashuv. Look at the leniency. Being that you're leaving the middle unplanted, if you look at the picture, we will view the middle piece part of the right. It will make the area of the right a chashuv place. And then again, we're going to use the middle unplanted area to also be viewed as an extension of to the left. When you put both of these areas together, now it's not called an extension. Now it's called a chashuv place. It's not the area in between is not a Beis Roiva. Doesn't matter. In other words, even though Rabbi Yechanan says that an extension, which is considered a Rosh Toiv, has to come from a properly planted field, how do you define the shear? Even in this case, it's going to be considered a chash of a field. And that's why you will be allowed to plant to the left one species, to the right another species, even though really the area in between does not give you the correct separation, because we're going to view this as a Rosh Toiv. Now here you see a very big chiddush, guys. You know what the big chiddush is? Is that here they're not angled in different positions. So we are extending the concept of a Rosh Toiv. The easiest Rosh Toiv, the Rosh Toiv is a rectangular, not a rectangular, a triangular, thank you. We're saying that whenever an observer, when you look at this picture, what do you see? Do you see area to the left and area to the right? Mingled or not mingled? They're not mingled. They're not mingled. That's the ikar. So even Rabbi Yechanan will be minded that will be good. But guys, if you would not include the area in the middle, the unplanted area, together with the right, and again together with the left, which is a tarta de sasta, then those pieces are just called extensions. And Rabbi Yechanan says an extension can never be Rosh Toiv. An extension has to be part of a bigger field. Here he's minded that we can be lenient. Now, says the Gemara, now we're going to ask a question. Oh, let me just read it inside. Moide Rabbi Yechanan, she'imoye beis Rabbi u'mechza. Shuzreya chatzi Rabbi read it. Chatzi Rabbi mikan, chatzi Rabbi mikan. Oise chatzi Rabbi nidin lekan or lekan. In other words, both sides are considered as a beis Raiva, which makes them chashul, and therefore we apply the din of the Rosh Toiv. Asks the Gemara against the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan. No, Gewalt, it's a bit late. Mastisa play on Rabbi Yechanan. Have a brisa that appears to contradict Rabbi Yechanan. Says the brisa, the person has two fields. And again, we're going to see from the brisa again, David, that the Rosh Toiv doesn't have to be a triangular, as long as what is adjacent appears to be an extension from something else. We're good. The same guy has two fields. Okay? Now I want you to tell you something. How much of a separation do you have to have from the two fields? Guys, remember what we said in the introductory words. You need to have a beis Raiva separation, which means you need to have 10.2 amas separating the two fields, and the guy left that. Mutar lahavi, tell him in time, you have to look at the picture. Once you planted it halachically correct, look at what this guy is doing. We already said that an extension doesn't have to come in from an angle, because the very fact that it's called an extension, that's called Rosh Toiv. Look at the picture. To the left, you have barley. Mamish in the area in between, you can have one telem, and it's not mingled, but side by side touching. Closer to the left barley, you can plant a row of barley. Closer to the side of the wheat, you plant a row of wheat. This little strip of row of barley are mamish touching each other. That's allowed. Why is it allowed? Because we view the row of barley to be as an extension of the barley field. We look at the row of, even though they're not touching, we look at the row of wheat to be an extension of the wheat field. And since they are extensions, we apply the heter of Rosh Toiv, even though they are parallel, because an extension has a din of a Rosh Toiv. We know what the problem is? That the row of barley is not touching the barley. The row of the wheat is not touching the wheat. So Rabbi Yechanan holds. Now here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. Be'emes, I know it's late, but I have to speak this out because we're in the middle of this thing. Even though it's not touching, the Gemara understands that because of the numbers that we have over here, was the whole separation between the barley and the wheat is a beis Raiva, is 10.2 amas. The telem in the middle has half of that or less. Halachically, it's called connected. But here's the problem. So what's the kasha b'chal against Rabbi Yechanan? If we view this halachically connected, so even Rabbi Yechanan is Maida, that what? that extensions have the heter of a Reish Torah if it's connected to a field, and to the left you have barley, to the right you have wheat. No. Reish Torah allows you to plant two species. The problem is like this: the Gemara's jump, which the Gemara will correct, is that the presumption is, since Rabbi Yechanan is machmir, that it has to be extended from an actual field. So therefore, Rabbi Yechanan l'chu'ura should hold that the extension must be planted at the same time. Because if you plant, what happened over here was you planted the barley and the wheat before. At any time later, you can put the telem in between, which means you're putting the strip, the row of barley and the row of wheat at a later time. The Gemara's presumption is that not only does Rabbi Yechanan hold that the extension, which could have the din of a Reish Torah, even if it's parallel, has to be connected, halachically connected, it has to be planted at the same time. Because if it's not planted at the same time, then why would it be called an extension? That was the Havamina. And the Gemara is going to answer, it doesn't have to be planted at the same time. That's simple. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you that this link is not accurate, because Rabbi Yechanan will learn, as we clearly see, the Tana Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds afil chita achas, chita achar chita nechnes l'toich sioidim, or usioida achar sioidim nechnes l'toich achitim. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that one is allowed to extend a row of seeds from one field into the other. Guys, that's what this line means. Even if they were planted later, this idea, here's guys, that when you make an extension, it has a din of a Reish Torah, he's saying, but this line means that I planted my wheat field now. At any later point, I can make an extension, not the whole field, just a strip, an extension, and I'm allowed to plant it either adjacent or protruding. That's going to be okay. But even Rabbi Yaakov that holds that you are allowed to plant an extension at a later time, but Rabbi Yaakov holds, which is a shita of Rabbi Yechanan, that it has to be connected. And if it's unconnected, then you don't have the heter. The way we're learning Pshat, but if it's unconnected, then it won't be okay. So what do we see? That even if you're machmir, like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, that they have to be halachically connected, not physically connected. If it's halachically connected, I don't care if it was planted later. So that's why Rabbi Yechanan won't be contradicted by the Baraisa. You have barley to the left, you have wheat to the right. They have the base rate about 10.2 amma separation. Everything is good. Now later you can plant in middle, one telen, barley and wheat parallel, and even there, even Rabbi Yechanan will apply the heter of a Reish Torah.